Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Case, and this is a channel where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff. So come think with me. Today's episode is very, very special. I have a returning guest, Dr. Selmer Bringsjord. Man, how do I describe this guy? He is a philosopher of mind, a logician, cognitive scientist running a AI lab. Like, he's awesome, and he's my kind of guy because he's in the AI lab in order to make his arguments against like conscious AI and argue for God from AI. And so when someone says, "Well, what do you know about it?" It's like, "Well, I work in a cognitive science AI lab." So I love this guy. Studied with Roderick Chisholm, so he's one of Chisholm's students. So you'll see why is he so smart? Well, partially because he's one of Chisholm's students. So I could keep talking about him, but I won't. I'll let him talk for himself. Before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast happen over on Patreon or YouTube members. If you guys like this stuff, if you like the work I do, if you like when I bring papers and books to your attention, please consider becoming a Patreon patron or YouTube member. You can support for a bunch of different tiers, and there's different perks at each tier. So everything helps me keep the lights on, helps me feed my dogs and my daughter. So please consider doing that. All right, that's enough commodification. Let's jump in with Dr. Selmer Bringsjord and talk about AI, God, irreversibility, consciousness, and other stuff. Dr. Bringsjord, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and I will thank you for the hyperbole, it's- but it really is indeed hyperbole. So I'm not that great. Just just a humble messenger, I hope, of some nuggets of truth about the mind and I and maybe the supernatural as well.
So good. Um, are you still can you explain what you do with the lab at Rensselaer?
Yeah, sure. I think overall we do primarily what is called logic-based AI or logicist AI. Could also use the adjective logical AI. And I've been doing that, gosh, I know it's as long as the argument from irreversibility appeared in print. So it's a few decades now. Very happy in the modern age of machine learning to hybridize,
Mm,
but we try to build, to use these technologies that are not logic based. And without a doubt, chatbots are explicitly, especially the ones that are pure deep learning based, are really explicitly not logic based to the point where if I run across not just experts in AI who would say this, but sometimes administrators in business, managers in business, administrators in the academy, they'll say, "Oh, so you do logic-based AI. Wow, I mean, that's still alive?" Yeah, it's not only still alive. If we don't want planes to crash and rocket ships to screw up, if we want high reliability and accuracy, we need that. So that's our calling card. If you need
mm,
that kind of precision and accuracy, I think overall, we're a good lab to go to for that kind of R&D, but most of the stuff in the lab that's of any consequence, I have to honestly say, is due to younger minds than mine.
mm,
Plenty of students and postdocs through the years that really make it possible, but including, again, some amazing cognitive robotics. We have a whole series of robots and a young roboticist aiming at the PhD fairly soon, John Slowick, who's in that space remarkable.
mm,
So, yeah, I could take a couple hours going through our projects. I think it's going to come up in our discussion soon that I am setting my sights on quantum computing and how it might relate to the kind of AI that we do. And I
mm.
think might be relevant to irreversibility. But
That's awesome. Well, so I came into AI mostly because of the philosophy of mind. I wanted to study consciousness, and I thought, well, when I start talking with some of the folks in the cognitive science world, they're using different language than I'm using. We're talking about similar things, so I need to start learning some of that. And then I learned the term of art, GoFi, good old fashioned artificial intelligence, and how modern chatbot folks and connectionists kind of poo-poo or they think it's out of date. It wasn't until I talked with Ben Gertzel and he's like, no, I'm trying to hybridize. I love logic based systems. I need them. And then I discovered your work and it's like, oh, this is so cool. I love that you're doing the hard work, and then to come to find out, like you just said, that yeah, there's a higher degree of accuracy. Chatbots aren't aimed at truth. They confabulate, and they're not as. It's just really fun to have this whole perspective shift. That oh, I think I actually like the logic guys more. I think you guys are doing better work. So it's pretty fun.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Ben is great, by the way. He's one of the most steadfastly open minded
Mm.
researchers in AI, maybe at the top of the list for me. I haven't brought him all the way around, but he's incredibly open minded. And I was at the first AGI conference years ago and just had a student present a joint paper at the last one. Yeah, they're a little overly optimistic about what'll be happening tomorrow in AI, but
Yeah.
he's really indeed open minded.
Yeah, every time I get you guys on, I mention you to each other, and you both say really kind things. He was saying last time I had him on, he was saying, "Yeah, I think that we're hyper computational as well, but for a different reason than Selmer. He would do it for he's a religious Christian. I would think something else, and it was just kind of cool to hear him say that he thinks we're hyper computational, even though he doesn't get there the same way.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that is fascinating. That
so
is
I want to
fascinating.
get to that, the hyper computational. If folks are listening and you don't know what that means, that's okay. We're gonna get there. But first, I thought we could start with one of your papers where you give an argument for God from AI, and so it's not using AI. You make this explicit in the paper. It's not using some kind of chat model or logic system. It's an argument from the concept of AI to God. I wonder, do you remember how this came about? Do you know like the discovery of this idea?
Uh, yes.
Mhm.
I I owe a lot to, in that regard, at least for, the catalyst, Steven Pinker, because
Mm,
he wrote a big book years ago called How the Mind Works, which it really was a massive tome. It articulated a very straightforward answer. What the heck's all the fuss about? The mind works like a computer, and the computer is a standard one. It is physically embodied. End of story. That's it. And he grappled in the book, though, to his credit, with Wallace's paradox,
mhm,
which is the great petition, the great um, canyon between Darwin and Wallace. Wallace said, "Yeah, but I just don't understand how all this super fancy stuff human beings can do think for them the calculus. There are many, but that was the differential and integral calculus. What the heck good did the differential calculus? What good did it do, or could it do when you're dealing with gathering berries and hunting down game in groups and maybe waging some warfare, which our hunter gatherer forebears having exactly, as far as we can tell, or almost exactly the same brains we're doing. What good was the calculus there? The answer is of no good. So the large in large measure, what we carry out in the university, at least in the formal sciences, and I would include a large part of really good philosophy there, is totally superfluous from the standpoint of what hunter gatherers were doing, what we were doing. And Wallace said, you know, for goodness sakes, Darwin, doesn't this minimally give you pause? Because how did this stuff, all this powerful mental cognitive stuff show up? What's the point of it? I mean, from a evolution, from a mutation and natural selection standpoint, there is no point.
mm,
And yeah, I mean, and they never agreed. And so what Pinker does in that book is grapple with that. He fails completely and utterly to does grapple with it, but he
yeah,
fails completely to deal with it. And at that time, I thought, okay, this is a serious problem. I reviewed the book. There's a review in philosophical psychology. In that regard, Pandit said the solution to Wallace's paradox was anemic at best. And so that's step one. And step two was his book. I have to be honest. Uh, on rationality, Are Humans Rational, which is his most recent one. When that came out, I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is really the same argument." I'd already published it in the European Journal, I think, for Science and Religion. I realized, "Oh my gosh, that's the same argument." Um, and so what he does there is make the whole thing clear. He points out, "Look, if you really wanna be a rational human being, you're gonna have to use the very things that he says in the first big book are indeed mysterious from the evolutionary point of view, but which we have." So then he shows up and is saying, "Hey, these are key and you need to cultivate them, etc." So I think I was really thinking all the way through, and including when I wrote it all down about Pinker, and this view going back to Wallace's paradox. But then I realized when the second book I'm mentioning came out, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I did.
Hmm.
And then the only missing ingredient to the whole thing was um, super confident about AI and robotics ability to build artifacts, artificial agents and robots that do match the behavior of hunter gatherers. So if AI can do that without monkeying around, without aspiring to monkey around, without handling higher level cognition, including what you need for inventing, using correctly anyway, the calculus, I'd have an argument because that's a serious problem. How do you explain that gap? Um, you could say most people in I think, are loath to say this. You could say, "Oh yeah, but you're too optimistic about AI in the short term using what it has as at its disposal now." No, I completely disagree with that, but there are a few who might say that. We're
Hmm.
going to get there. We're going to build robots that are able to get a bunch of blueberries,
Yeah.
uh, use spears. They're gonna be on the battlefield, but I can guarantee you they are not going to need, when they show up and do that stuff increasingly, anything like the powerful cognition that you need in the case of, a Newton or a Leibniz to get things going, or a Robinson who vindicated Leibniz on the calculus because he returned to the infinitesimals. But I mean, that's really the genesis. It's a long genesis, the genesis of the argument. Because once you have this gap, unless you're some kind of nihilist, scientifically speaking, you have to go in search of an explanation, a decent explanation for this.
Hmm.
Um, and well, I'm going to a personal explanation in the technical sense. I'm going to an explanation in another person. I'm
Hmm.
not going to find that. No one's going to find the explanation. Darwin couldn't find it. Darwin just bit the bullet and said dogs are fundamentally reasoning the same way humans are. That's his book, Descent of Man, which is, look, Origin of the Species is a masterpiece. That book is a philosophically, logically speaking, absolute disaster. No, dogs are smart. I love dogs. I'm a dog person. They can't reason
Hmm.
the way we can. They can't reason abstractly. So I go find the explanation in a really powerful person who has the very same attributes that we are identifying here, that
Hmm.
we are standing in awe of, and that's God.
Yeah. I love that, and you mentioned that it's a mental argument or a neological argument, and these are my favorite types. So when I saw that it was a neological argument from AI, I was like, man, and for God, it's just like bringing everything that I love together. Um, and I really love that. I wonder, does the argument depend on a certain type of AI, or is it just like AIs in general? Because you did mention automated reasoning
Yeah.
and the logic theorist from like the 1950s. But I wonder, can you run it from logical AI, or can you also run it from transformer neural nets? Does it matter? Is it just the phenomena of an embodied AI gathering blueberries and doing what hunter gatherers do?
You can run it with an instantiation to uh, AI, not as the sort of label we use for the discipline, but instantiated to what AI is today across the board,
Mm,
everything.
Okay.
So I I'm putting everything into that category. And there really isn't, I mean, deep learning is old,
Right.
right? So deep a quarter, easily a quarter of a century. And before that, there were plenty of people on the logic side saying, "Oh yeah, I kind of see how you're going to be able to use artificial neural networks for all kinds of things." These were some of the founders of that was John McCarthy. Okay, I
Right.
got it.
Yeah.
But you'll never be able to do logic there. I mean, what he was reacting to is no different than what we have available today, fundamentally. So the answer to your question is no. It's the whole thing. There could be some, I guess, in concept, some secret lab outside. It can't really be an industry because industry, with all due respect, is tracking on a different time scale than governments.
Hmm.
They're looking for payoff, sooner than 50 years. So unless there's some secret new paradigm I don't know about, in which there's the AI counterpart to Newton or Leibniz again, I think we're pretty safe in identifying AI and what's needed and what it can provide and what's needed for building an artificial hunter gatherer with what we see. What we see is what we get.
Mm.
Um, we could get more fine grained about that. I mean, China announced a few years back it wanted to be the world's dominant power in AI, but by all accounts, what they said was, "We'll do it with we'll do it by way of statistical numerical machine learning using artificial neural networks." Could they have a secret, you know, the lab where they're doing something different? I don't think so.
Yeah. From what Ben Goertzel said, he's like, yeah, they also would like to have control over it. They're just as they control their populace, they would not want to make a robot that is generally intelligent that could get away from them or something too. So,
Yeah, that's a important topic that I spend a lot of time not just thinking about, but doing research, and that's
mm,
important. The only solution to that, not particularly central to what's on the docket for us today, is you know, kind of like why if you're bullied at school and you tell your parents, "Well, I mean, I got hit." I mean, it wasn't just verbal. I got hit. Like I'm worried. Yeah, at some point, separate from the powers that be and enlisting them, you might need to know how to punch back. So th- we're not going to stop losing the need for a military that is superior
mm,
AI technology to defend us. And unfortunately, this is just a good old fashioned competition
yeah,
with some of our quote adversaries. And yeah, it's not going away.
yeah. So that's really helpful and scary. When it comes to the argument here, so we have this cognitive power that we can use for higher mathematics that our hunter gatherer ancestors would not have needed. I'm not super familiar with Pinker's reasoning, but I know like Jordan Peterson is a pretty big deal in in public opinion. He's got this view, which I bet is probably close to Pinker's because a lot of the evolutionary folks give the same type of argument. Peterson's is that, hey, look, we're like map makers. We're trying to map our environment. It's safer for our ancestors to start thinking in their head and making a mental map of their environment because they don't run into the saber-toothed tiger. So they start mentally making maps, and then the rising tide lifts all ships. And eventually, oops, we can do higher order mathematics and abstruse metaphysics and stuff like that. I don't know. How does that match up with Pinker's?
Essentially the same
Okay.
view. He does talk about some variable explicitly, some variabilization or parameterization. He refers to something he calls a pad of forms.
Mm,
You can't express the definition of a limit in you can avoid it if you go to infinitesimals, but the first week of calculus differential integral again, you have to define a limit, and the definition of a limit involves minimally three quantifiers. You have all, you have some, And the definition is incredibly complicated. I can assure you that you don't need to reason using an expression like everyone likes anyone who likes someone and figure out what follows from it. That has three. Okay.
Yeah.
That's that construction's explored in psychology of reasoning famously by the immortal psychologist, cognitive psychologist Philip Johnson Laird.
Mm,
That's only three. Okay. So whatever Jordan is talking about, let's just look at the specifics, and it's going to be very easy to prove. You don't need a sigma three as there. You don't need a sigma three or pi three formula, and you do need those things to do math. We know that from reverse mathematics now. The great thing about what's happened since I started thinking about this is that reverse mathematics was just, it's not in the argument. I don't think I'd mention it, but it was just sort of a glimmer at the time. Now we know what it takes to do mathematics, cognitively speaking, because we've mapped out the axiom systems that are sufficient to give us the results that have been obtained and that in many cases sort of look ahead to what will be obtained. We know the complexity of these things.
yeah.
Okay. None of those things are in AI today. In fact, if you show the reverse mathematics results to someone, anyone in AI, with the exception of, it might sound absurd, but with the exception of the people sort of on the cutting edge of logic-based AI, what they might be dreaming about, you find no constructions like that.
Yeah.
So mapping out the adversaries, or your adversary or multiple adversaries in a multi-agent uh, battle, or anticipating that. Look, I mean, I don't know. Everyone's going to have a spear or a knife, a single universal quantifier. And besides which, you're not going to have to reason over these constructions, which you have to do. And this is one of the reasons why, by the way, formally, we also know educationally why calculus is difficult.
Mm,
It is difficult, right? We have large parts of the United States, right, in the establishment saying we're not sure we need to structure high school math so that everyone takes it or can or even can take it because so many human beings do poorly. Well, we know one of the reasons they do poorly is it's just freaking difficult.
yeah.
And we have a mathematical measure of that difficulty. So that's, you know, that's the problem for any of these views that Peterson or Pinker might be going with.
Yeah. Well, so we have these cognitive powers. Use the superscript infinity, but it's like it's to do this abstract mathematics. That's what we have. Our hunter gatherers presumably possessed like the latent potential for that, or they eventually developed it. It seems weird to think that they would have the latent potential. It seems like it would have to be developed because they don't believe in like set kinds or anything like that. So like they think that we like the Darwinistic evolutionist is like, no, you single celled organisms. There's no, it doesn't seem like there's latent potential in that organism to do abstruse metaphysics and advanced abstract
Well,
logic and math.
well, that latency view, or that was Stephen Jay Gould's view.
Okay.
So he, roughly to the extent that he did really come to grips with the underlying formal stuff, his, because he was an exaptationist or ex-adaptationist.
Hmm.
Evolution proceeds by these pockets of revolutionary changes.
Punctuated
Um,
equilibrium, is that's how you say it, right?
I'm sorry.
I think it's did he call it punctuated equilibrium?
Um, Possibly, I
Okay.
don't know.
Yeah.
Um, Leaving aside all terminology,
Sure.
um, he said explicitly there could have been a mutation out of the blue that actually didn't relate to survival value at
Hmm.
all.
Hmm.
That just happened. And then it stayed dormant until these powers were needed. Um, what, 250,000 years later. So we do have a prominent person and an evolutionist, an evolutionary theorist who explicitly um, maintained this position. I do discuss it in my review of Pinker's book.
Mm.
That entails, I guess I wrote him some letter about this. It might have been a little fiery, but he's deceased now. But
Yeah.
the problem is if you let this go, if you let him get away with this, I'm not going to let him.
Mhm.
Others can. If you let someone get away with this view, which you rightly express skepticism about, then you probably have Popper turning in his grave because now you have no ability to falsify pretty much any of evolutionary theory. If you can never find something that's like ludicrously, astoundingly powerful and had no survival value all the way along,
Mhm.
that you find to cast doubt on evolution because someone can say, "Oh yeah, that's okay. That kicked in now because of the mutation earlier." I mean, then you don't have science. You have and you don't have first rate religion either. You have Kierkegaardian fideism. You have just irrational leaps of faith. So you can't do that. He can't do that, intellectually speaking, but he certainly did.
Yeah.
So I'm not at all. I'm affirming what you're saying about the implausibility of it. That he
Okay.
that's 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 his view.
Yeah. I wonder, so to make it plausible, you might need God putting in latent potential in some form of theistic evolution or something like that. Because then you can bake it in. Yeah, he knew what was gonna happen. So you still have teleology, but then the process might be superfluous because if you have like, you don't need that mechanism unless God just wanted to make that mechanism. So, yeah, that's a fun one.
Well, yeah, I mean, from a Christian perspective, as far as I know, perhaps from uh, other Orthodox monotheistic perspectives, I can't imagine it would be any different for conservative to Orthodox Jews. Um, you know, it's it's an incredible fit because we could just zero in on the book of Genesis. All right.
Hmm.
The book of Genesis is telling the story of a class of creatures stand totally and completely apart from everything else because they are made in the image of God and have the relevant moral and purely intellectual powers that we are talking about here. As a book that I think everyone should read, whether they're atheists, agnostics, theists, Christians. I don't care. Everyone should meet Marilyn Robinson's Genesis. I mean, I was waiting for this for a long time. I pre-ordered it, and here you have a Pulitzer Prize winning. This isn't what I do. Okay, I mean, I do somewhat more boring argumentation and somewhat more precise, boring AI from other people's standpoints, right? But here you have a literary genius saying, "How about if I examine this Genesis thing to see if it says that we're special?"
Hmm.
And the results are absolutely stunning. I mean, it's been predictably, you get some atheists carping about parts of it, but boy, they'd be lucky if they could write half the sentences
Hmm.
that Robinson writes. I think it's sort of like take Daniel Dennett's phraseology and inclination to turn a phrase. Um, a lot of it is way over the top and clearly just window dressing. Take it, purify it by the standards of literary greatness, and have it applied to the philosophically deep topic of who the heck are we?
Mm.
Where do we come from? What makes sense here? And now that those questions are on the table, does the book of Genesis provide some interesting, answers, if not proposals that go unnoticed by most people?
Yeah. I have to get that book. I wrote down a note to
Yeah,
myself.
you'll
That
like it.
sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. So as this argument goes, we have the mental powers that are that hunter gatherers have. Obviously, I can go out and hunt and gather. May not be as good as it as others, but we also have this mental power to do calculus. Though again, I may not be as good at doing that. But
Yeah, and you're right, and it's not just calculus. Well, that's a good that's a good focus point. But yeah,
yeah.
keep going. Sorry.
Well, even just folks listening to this podcast and thinking about it and abstracting out meanings and y yeah, you don't have to do that in order to survive. So there's like yeah, there's lesser powers that still are above what our presumed ancestors would have to do. So our having these powers contra Darwin is inexplicable by gradual development, but it is explicable. You can you motivate that one for us? I think it's like premise 5 maybe, um, or premise 6. It just the conclude the statement, right? Our having these cognitive powers is explicable. What I wonder if someone objects and says it's not explicable. We don't know why we have these powers. They're unexplainable. I don't know. We don't have a good reason explanation for them now. So maybe there just is not one. Is that how someone might object to that premise?
Without a doubt,
Okay.
the, um, the history, if we round it off at the year 1000, um, with the Anselmian ontological argument for God's existence, there are arguments, before that. Clearly, we could say, especially if we appreciate Aristotle sufficiently, that he has some arguments we should take very seriously. But if we round it off at 1000 and start turning the clock forward and look at objections to any argument that goes hunting for an explanation of something extraordinary, we will see over and over and over again that if the skeptic, the atheist, is pushed far enough or pushed into a sufficiently tight corner, eventually it will be said, well, don't forget about the disjunct that is, there is no explanation.
Mhm.
I'm, what the, come on. Well, yeah. And we keep playing this out with all the teleological. The problem is these people can't be scientists because then they should just pretty much pack up and, go home. Right. So it's, it's not a practicable position. And others have explained this in connection with prime mover arguments and, yeah, you could say that. Um, Pack up and go home. It's inexplicable.
Mm.
Um, sure, but that
Yeah.
again is 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 a position that is inconsistent with the rest of one's intellectual life. So you end up being essentially some form of a double-minded person or schizophrenic.
Mm.
So yeah, you could say that.
I've only seen this, well, not only, but I have seen this in, like, the more Phil Mind stuff, around consciousness. I think Colin McGinn, he's like, it's a he calls it Mysterianism. So it sounds like a really good name, but it's just kind of like a, "Hey, we don't know, and so probably we can't know."
Yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
man, that's I don't know,
yeah.
that's a weird reasoning, I think.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. He does. So we talked initially, I think, before we got going about my new argument under construction. I got a question for people who are in that camp. Okay. Why is it that every time such a thing is is under the not physical microscope, but under the microscope, when we look at it and think
Mm,
about it, okay, now you mentioned consciousness. Even Dennett was fairly impressed with the fact that he was an eliminative materialist, so at times he had this ridiculous view that we're not conscious.
right.
Whatever. You're conscious, Parker. I'm conscious. Because we're conscious, we actually think it's a pretty good idea to go on living.
Mhm,
Okay. So being conscious, at least in the phenomenal consciousness sense, being able to experience what it's like to have for me, to have fresh tracks after a snowstorm at a significant ski resort, ski area, ski mountain. I mean, that's like a really good thing. Okay. It's really enjoyable. Why is it that all of these things are like the best? You know, you would think it wouldn't just keep being the things that a god would. These are like really special things, you
Mhm.
know, and self consciousness. It's pretty good that we're self conscious, not just we. I believe all mammals, for example, despite what Descartes, all mammals are conscious. They have inner feelings. They have emotions. There's something it's like going on there. Okay, and they experience pain, pleasure, and so forth. But they don't know that they are experiencing those things and that it's really good to do a few things now so that an hour later they'll have different experiences, that they themselves will have those different experiences.
Yeah.
So there's another one, self-consciousness. Oh, that's really good. And these higher powers, these are really good things. Okay. Without the calculus, there's no moonshot. You don't even have a moonshot in concept. You have no aspiration because if you don't have what Newton knew we needed to make for ordinary, macroscopic objects in motion. If you can't make predictions, you're not sending. You don't have moonshot. You don't have mission to Mars. These are good things. They're
Yeah.
glorious things. So again, that's my how is this? I mean, doesn't this look a little suspicious? And
Hmm.
then you go to things that Robert Adams has talked about,
Yeah,
right?
Wall stuff. Yeah.
What about little things like if you go out and you take a break and you want to walk through the gardens and somebody puts some care into the garden, you're like, "What's that? What's that aroma?
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Let me go. Oh, man, these are roses." And I think he talks about that particular. So how is it that our consciousness is also keyed in on these particular experiences that are possible in our world? So this just happened. There's no explanation for it. I mean, I'm calling balderdash, and I'm saying the rest of one's life will belie the hypocrisy of this view.
Yeah. There's been some really good work recently by folks like Brian Cutter at Notre Dame, who he came up with this psychophysical harmony, and it's actually like right along with what you're talking about. Like, why is there psychophysical harmony between our soul or mind and our body, such that we actually have these good experiences? They are the experiences that we do have. They could have been otherwise, but they're not. How come when we smell a flower, it's not? It doesn't smell like dog poop or something. Like it's a little bit more. It's a little bit
No,
better
no,
than I'm describing, but yeah.
no. I get it. That's right, and I like it, and I agree. Yeah, when we get together and talk to Leibniz about Cutter's views, or when Cutter and Leibniz maybe they'll meet, Leibniz will say, yeah, that was pretty smart there, because I had some ideas about harmony, but I didn't take them to fruition.
That's great. Well, so there is, one of your premises, 5 maybe. You say, "Look, there's 3 options here, either evolutionary one E1, E2, or, God exists," and then you say, "Not E1, not E2." Um, maybe as we're closing up this part of it, why not those other 2 options?
Um, Now remind me what the other 2 options are because,
Yeah, I
my
wish I had
son
them
always
in front
gives
of
me
me.
with justification a hard time about this. "Dad, you wrote a paper and, you don't you yeah, but I'm working on another now and I can't." Yeah, but
I
whatever.
love that. So I need to, pull them up. I was
Yeah,
actually
yeah, yeah.
hoping to lean on you for that one. I know I'm the same way, and I didn't know this until I started actually writing papers and getting them published. I've only a couple, but still, someone asked me about it. I'm like, that was a couple years ago, and I was very deep into the literature at the
Good.
moment. So like, let me just read my own paper again. I'm sorry, but I don't have it all in.
Exactly.
I'm always surprised with what I do remember and what I don't remember. E1 is the explanation of the state of affairs that we have cognitive powers, P infinity through PHG, hunter gatherer, is that some powerful extraterrestrial beings seeded or interjected these powers into the brains of hunter gatherers so that eventually the wonders we know and use would arrive once our species figure out how to use the powers that were injected. So, like, directed panspermia, kind of, but also like more directed because they're shooting them in. And then E2 is the explanation here is that some unknown exotic natural force outside of known physical science causes it to be the case that we have the cognitive powers that enable mankind to harness discoveries and analysis. So both of these are they're not evolutionary because
Right,
evolutionary is out because gradual progression is out. So here's
right.
two other ones that are plausible, I guess. And it's funny for some folks will be like these are not plausible. But if you listen to the Joe Rogan podcast at all, he's going to talk about these because he thinks they're super plausible. Along with like stoned ape, which might be E2, which is like, yeah, our ancestors took mushrooms on accident and it grew their frontal cortex or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, by the way, taking such things, including to this very day in the current debate regarding psychedelics and so forth, um, is inimical to providing rigorous justification for anything.
Mm,
And the phenomena I'm talking about requires rigorous justification, maximally in the form of proof and minimally in the form of tight reasoning and argumentation. So, yes,
is
I've
that
had
the
some talks with people about the mind expanding stuff. Another topic, another day. But
mm,
I asked that question in this enlightenment, supposedly, that might arise from that. Does anyone actually come up with anything discursive? Is there any ratiocination associated? And the answer I got back from yeah, I'm a little bit reluctant to quote him.
mhm.
A leading international authority was no. But yeah, these are the other candidates. I mean, the first one is 2000. The first one is the Arthur C. Clarke 2001 explanation, if we want to label it
It's nice.
colloquially, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Right. Well, there ain't much evidence for that.
Mhm,
So these other ones, um, the truth is, the next round of dialectic, these other ones have to be embedded in the next round, and we need an argument or arguments for the disjuncts that I'm ruling out to at least render them somewhat plausible.
mm,
I still remember very clearly going to a friend of my mother's in Scarsdale, New York, and she had a son, her friend, and the idea was I would get together with the son, and we'd have fun playing standard stuff. And I remember the mother telling me that the pyramids were possibly built by space creatures or aliens because they weren't, it wasn't really possible for them to be built at the time. And I just have this vivid memory, and so my memory was, I liked the guy who was approximately my age a lot, we played, but what the mother said, now that really got my attention.
hmm,
And I remember thinking, "Wow, I'm pretty young. I don't know, like, this sounds like, but I gotta look into this." And it didn't take me long to realize, "Hey, the stuff that my father does on the job site," 'cause my father was a builder, you know, the stuff that these guys are doing is crazy. Like,
mm,
I remember, a certain, younger than my father, friend of my father, there was a steel beam delivered. And so to this big house, and they were taking bets as to whether anybody could lift it. And there was a 6'4" Norwegian. I'm 6'2". I wasn't
mm,
his size. I'm not his size. Wasn't his size then. I'll
yeah,
never be his size. I might have been a better shape and more muscular, but like he was like, I can't, I'm not trying. I can't lift it. I'm
mm,
not wagering. And then this friend of my father says, well, I can lift it. I'm ready to take bets. And they took bets. And predictably, I think it was, approximately, it was over 20 feet long. He goes over to one side of it
mm,
and rigs up a little lever mechanism. I think he used a 2x4, maybe just 2x4s, 2x4 and 2x6. I didn't say I could lift it with my bare hands.
mhm,
Okay. But I'll tell you what, I will. So he pushes down with his foot, lifts it up, holds it in the air. I'm holding it. I want my money.
Uh,
So I remember thinking later, goodness gracious, this alien thing is absurd with the pyramids. I'm thinking it's absurd across the board. At any rate, there's no evidence for any of this. So
mhm.
we're it's just idle speculation. It's
Yeah.
an interesting hypothesis, but I'm sorry, I like 2001, but it's a creative work.
Yeah.
It's not science.
Yeah.
So, now exotic natural forces really just reduces to what, I said the problem is with Stephen Jay Gould.
Mhm.
If you can invoke an exotic natural force to, quote, "provide the explanation for something that you find scientifically intractable from the standpoint of explanation, you're never going to be, uh, you're never going to fail. You're always going to be able to invoke that, which is, again, I think, absurd.
Yeah.
Harry, and everything's gotta be substantiated to a high degree of likelihood in science for us to take it seriously. If we're saying it's just a possibility, then we have to have a roadmap. So if we're talking about the Perhelion effect in the case of Einstein and relativity, yes, people wanted that to see the empirical evidence. I can tell you Einstein didn't have any interest in, I mean, he wasn't concerned at all. The roadmap got us there by other methods, and we have to at least be on that road pointing, seeing forward to the other candidate, the second explanation of exotic. We got to see something that is plausibly leading us there. Otherwise, again, we reduce to just blind faith.
Yeah, and blind faith in an exotic natural force that you some people aren't labeling, others are, and, putting a name on it like it's a mushroom or something like that. While there's an explanation, a personal explanation right there, which they want to preclude for whatever reason. They have their own reasons, but it's not scientific reason. That's like they bake that one in. Where like we don't get personal explanations. Like, well, I guess detectives don't get to do that either. Then, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's a great point about detectives. Detectives do have to trade in personal explanations versus, say, mechanistic or inanimate ones. I think this distinction um, is exploited with great effect by Richard Swinburne,
Mm,
but it certainly doesn't start with him. So, yeah, detectives be out of a job.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah, maybe we don't need them. We'll put that one to the empirical test. Let's see
mm,
how the world works without detectives trying to bring people to justice.
yeah. I love this argument, because it's a neurological argument, but also the same it's in a similar vein to like Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism and Tom Crisp's formulation where he just targets metaphysical theorizing in based on Darwinistic evolution. But I like this one. I like this one better actually. So I don't want to blow too much smoke at you, but it's really practical because AI is such a, whatever that term picks out, is such a, big thing right now, and it's so, like, sexy, so it's really fun to be able to bring this to people's attention. It's different than saying, "Hey, look, let me talk to you about a frog and why it doesn't matter whether or not, he thinks he's gonna be a prince if he eats another dragonfly." That's cool, I like frogs too, but this one's another one in the toolbox, which is great.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think it might have some, and I'm not going to disagree with you, obviously. I I really do think that if you showed up at AGI conference 2024, where a student presented a paper, he won best paper award there,
Wow,
by the way, and
nice.
I was happy to ride his coattails on that. But if you ask people there, I asked him yesterday. I said, you know, singularity, when the machines leave us in the dust, they explode in intelligence. When do people generally, they think that's going to happen still at AGI, and they think that's fairly soon. He said, and he just immediately, oh, absolutely, that's the dominant view. And people seem to really be reasonably happy with Ray Kurzweil's 2045
Mhm.
date. And then there's the smaller question that relates to this argument, the more reasonable question. when does AGI happen? When does AI that reaches human intelligence happen? And so he said, well, there was a lot of, in his opinion, I'm just relaying what he said. There's a lot of settlements there. 2029.
Hmm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, I don't think so at all, but you are going to have your replicants for hunter gatherers if any of that makes any sense. You're gonna, if any of that makes sense, if it's not, it is overly optimistic, but you don't need full human intelligence by 2029 to get hunter gatherers.
Yeah.
You need what we currently need in the battle space. Okay. You,
Mhm.
you, I mean, we need it for defense. We're not going, but you need the drones. Okay. If it's 5 years and 10 years down the road and Russia's still, God forbid, actually, if Putin's still doing you need the drones to be much more intelligent. The pressure's there for that. Is the drone going to need to go through the letters and the work that Leibniz did to figure out what we might want to do on the fringes of, you know, frontier breaking math? No, but we're going to see this. So the argument has, I think the empirical side of the argument is pretty reasonable.
Mhm.
We have
Yeah.
the tech, we have the science for that. We have the math for it. We have we have the money for it.
Mm.
Right now, that may change to develop it. It's gonna happen. And then what are people going to say? Well, inevitably they'll say, "Well, we'll just get further along in AI. We'll get this." That's what they'll say in AI. But I'm gonna say again, let's go back to the argument. I'm saying, what was the point of the stuff? The great stuff, the great cognitive powers that we had.
Yeah. Well, and this the development of AI is being done by intentional agents who are cognitively above them, able to do these things, building them up. So if we are able to make them approach or even reach our level of intelligence, that's because there was an intelligent design to it. This other process is supposed to be led not by intelligent design, and all that matters is that they're able. So it's not whether an AI can do hunter gathering stuff and do abstract metaphysical and mathematical reasoning. It's just that you could make a robot that only does hunting and gathering and doesn't need to do those other things. That's all you need for the argument, and that's so plausible. Even the empirical stuff, it's like I don't need to go and look. Like that's very obvious that that can
You're right.
happen. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
yeah,
thank you. No, I
yeah.
think so. Yeah.
Well, so that brings us. There's this right at the end of this paper. There's a great transition into irreversibility. Um, You say that Darwinian I think maybe I'm saying Darwinian evolution, but that's the evolution picking up, is a process entirely at the level of, Turing machine computation, and yet, we are hyper computational. Um, so there's this theorem, no Turing level process or machine can produce a hyper computational process or machine. Um, I think, like, understanding this point is really key, but it is kind of hard to understand. It's the same thing. It's an analog to, the Darwinistic evolution. It's like you have a Turing level of computation, you're not gonna get out of that. You're not gonna develop hypercomputation from that Turing level process. Is that right?
100% right. As long as you're building in the assumption, the supposition that the machine itself is going to get you out of there.
Mm,
You could take the original Turing machine and put it to the side. Now, hypothetically, produce some machine that's more powerful than it, which is quite a trick, and just tack the two together. But it's not something that's done by the Turing machine. So
yeah,
we have the original self-replication um, theorem, family of theorems that I believe are from Neumann. So we know that Turing machines can replicate. And people have been worried about this, and they should be worried about it. AI's artificial agents, to the extent that they're implemented Turing machines, can replicate fast.
Mm,
Um, but that's different than making something that is more powerful than what you, if we personalize it, you are to begin with. That is indeed mathematically impossible
mm.
for
I
for any two levels. Okay, in any of the higher any of the progressions we're talking about here, that is not possible. If it was possible, we'd have a really bizarre collapse of really the hierarchies we're dealing with. We can have some collapses that are more esoteric and so forth that might happen, but not not that one.
yeah,
So the hypercomputation thing just, if it's true, just knocks everything down that pure naturalists, physicalists, materialists, atheists, this whole irrational, illogical crowd knocks down in one fell swoop everything they like,
yeah,
because evolution has been, and now it hasn't been fully formalized, but every time someone makes decent progress and gives a decent articulation, kind of lines up very nicely with what Dennett said more informally. It's an algorithm. Well, look, if it's an algorithm, it's Turing computable. It's a Turing level process. It's a Turing level process cannot produce machines that are capable of doing more than a Turing machine. So that unless you want to redefine evolution, that knock. I'm not saying that evolution's real. It happens all the time.
mm,
Uh, it's still happening. We got evolutionary computation. I got it. But that doesn't mean that plenty of stuff didn't show up that is partly biological by virtue of processes that are not evolutionary. I mean, this is the point of what we've been talking about.
right,
So,
right, and then
yeah,
you have to explain that, right? And so, Stephen Jay Gould has his
yeah,
explanation. There's a
yeah.
yours is a personal one, my favorite, I think it's better, I think it's, more, explanatory power and simple. Um, yeah, that's really good. I see a similar, maybe it's the same argument, but I do see it like another analog when I talk with Ben Gersel and folks. He gets he's so funny. I love that guy. But he gets agitated by folks who are really pumping the transformer neural net models and saying, "Hey, look, from this, we're going to get general AI." Or AGI, and that's Ben's whole thing is AGI, like, everything is about AGI, and he's like, "Look, it's not gonna escape its training data." He's like, "If you understand what these models are, you know they're not gonna be able to leap outside themselves," and it seems like a similar thing with trying to get hypercomputation from a purely Turing level, computation, or getting, our cognitive capacities from a purely Darwinistic, not guided process.
Yep. No, indeed. Indeed, Parker.
Yeah.
It's, they are directly analogous.
It's really fascinating because at one level, I'm like, "Look, I like these arguments. I like arguments for God. I like arguments against naturalism. It's fun conversation." But then when I think about what the implications are, it's like we're really, really special, like human beings. And we have these capacities that we use for evil, which is crazy. So we're really, really evil using these capacities. And yet we're really, really awesome. And it's like, C.S. Lewis talking about how glorious and terrible and amazing we will be and aren't. And it's like, reflecting on yourself, when I turn back to think about my capacities, it's just crazy. It's so wild to think about. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. No, well said. Absolutely. Lewis was really on to immemorial truth there, and,
Mm,
it's really bad when, in particular, humans, the 2 come together
mm,
and the power, what when cognitive intellectual power is joined with, moral evil, that's about as bad as you can,
seriously.
fortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, we didn't really see that in the case of Hitler, because he was a complete moron, right?
Mm,
At the end of the day, he was evil, and, he also thought, "Oh, gee, I'll just keep expand." Really? You're gonna keep expanding when there's this thing called the United States off to the side with an industrial complex that could achieve air superiority no matter what the heck you do. But we do have examples, unfortunately, other agents where um, they have high intellectual gifts, and they might not be so nice, and the two get put together, and that's not good.
Yeah, in this conversation, that's a big worry about existential risk and the control problem and all sorts of stuff of us using these natural hypercomputational abilities to make non-hypercomputational things that
Yeah,
kill us, which is terrible. Yeah, and
now
scary.
that's worrisome.
Yeah. Well, so before we go too dark, this argument from irreversibility is really closely connected, I think, here, and it has to do with well, it has to do with cognition and the slogan from the cognitive scientists that cognition is computation, which I get all the time. So I was really blessed to read this paper and have something, grist for the mill. I want to maybe can I just give a summary of it and see if I got it right? Because I wrote a précis on this and I want to see if I actually understand it.
Absolutely.
All right. So here we go. So all computation can be captured or described by a Turing machine. All Turing machines are reversible. If all computation can be wholly captured by a Turing machine, then all computation is likewise reversible. If cognition is computation, then cognition is likewise reversible. But phenomenal conscious states are not reversible. Doesn't even really make sense to say that. So cognition, at least not all cognition, is computation. Does that sound right?
Sounds really good. There's only one thing you would need to do, in my opinion, to through a slight adjustment make it um, perfect as encapsulation, the kind of thing that GPT 4.0 and such uh, agents would not be able to do or understand they even need to do, let alone do it. So that would be, we do have to be talking about standard computation.
Okay.
So if we're not talking about standard computation, then we have actually a problem with hyper computation. But even if we want to, so just we want to stay, let's say we want to stay away from that because it's central to our earlier discussions, might be
Mhm.
again. You still have the issue that there are people who are looking for forms of computation that are perhaps purely analog, that are somehow grounded and understood in terms of the reals, the real numbers, right?
Yeah.
The computation we're talking about here, standard computation, is completely circumscribed by processes that take natural numbers, sets thereof, render some kind of transformation in accordance with a computer program, an algorithm, etc. There are an infinite number of possibilities, and produce other natural numbers as output. In other words, they are what are sometimes called arithmetic functions, where the idea is elementary arithmetic is just about the natural numbers. Think grade school stuff before you get to the before you get to, well, you get to fractions, but fractions, so rational numbers are no larger than the natural numbers. So before you get to the irrational numbers, uh, a bad experience for some, this maybe most.
Yeah.
I remember being astonished.
Mm.
The ancients were astonished. But so we have to be, we're talking about standard computation. Now, the good news is, at least from my point of view, that adjustment will have really no effect on the reach and power of the argument by virtue of the very, well, it's a completely invulnerable, unexceptionable observation that that's how computer science and AI works today, right?
Mm. Okay.
So there, we don't lose anything, but we do have to, from a scholarly point of view, I could give some names of people who, uh, I'm one of them. I just won't live long enough to do this, but there are younger people or old, same age or such, that who have tinkered with this notion. So that those forms of computation are out of bounds because um, we're talking about the real numbers, and you won't have the kind of reversibility you have with the Turing machine, which is digital, discrete, and computation, as explained in the paper. Okay, computation there is what it's been since before Turing. It is the sequence of snapshots of finite, discrete states, the symbols for which, or the symbols with which to depict them, we have.
Yeah.
And that's what a Turing machine is. That's what you learn when you start learning programming. If you do in the early grades, that's what you learn if you take your AP computer science class in the United States, and some students, not many. That's what you learn if you become a comp sci major or do anything computational. That's what you learn if you take your first AI class. That's what it's based on. That's what you use if you become an AI researcher.
Mm.
But again, we do have to be clear about that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So, do you think that slogan? I mean, I think the slogan's probably been around for a while. Cognition is computation. It might even be like from the beginning of cognitive science. Does that pick out standard computation, or if you press someone on that, I guess it depends on the person. You just said there's only a
Yeah,
few.
99.9% of the time, the slogan works just fine for whoever you're talking to because
Nice
cognition is computation. They're thinking of computation
that we
in
have.
the
Yeah.
traditional way. But, you know, um, then you've got to start, you might have to start thinking about the quantum realm, um, for example, which is out there for brains, right? Penrose is famous for toying with those ideas. So you
Hmm.
got to look at quantum computation. That won't change anything currently, the way we do quantum computation, because quantum computers are still insisting to use one, you still have to get a readout through time.
Mm.
That is well behaved and standard. You're not you know why do you have a quantum computer? Why did the U.S. intelligence community persist using large amounts of taxpayer money to invest in quantum computing? Is it that they thought they were going to break the bounds of Turing level computation or lambda calculus based computation if we go back before Turing? No, they thought there'd be incredible speed up, and there will. And the speed up, but the speed up will be understood and read in traditional digital symbolic form. So
Mm.
quantum doesn't really do it. But on the other hand, there are physical states, there are physical things happening at the level of the physics in a quantum computer that will not be reversible. But the computation itself still is. But then again, if you look to the broader, go from 99.9% to 100%, you do have some scholars saying, okay, some of them have toyed with hypercomputation. You can get hypercomputation by just allowing real number coefficients in the equations that ultimately define neural networks.
Mm.
You get hypercomputation that way. They're called, one class is called analog chaotic neural networks.
Mm.
Um, I like it because I think that may be a window into how we are actually hypercomputing. So if I had to be forced to say, well, show me from the standpoint of brain science how this makes any sense. I don't think it's very hard in light of that body. But then this argument from irreversibility is a different animal. That
Yeah. But they would be to jump off of cognition is standard computation to cognition is computation star, which includes hypercomputation, is to jump over into your realm of you got to explain hypercomputation. That's a really special thing because the slogan is, at least from the folks that I've talked with in the cognitive science world, it's meant to be a diminution, like you're diminishing down, saying this is just what we are. But then if you have to say this is just what we are, and it's incredibly special and cries out for explanation from a transcendental being, that's not really quite the same impetus, I think.
no, you got it. Absolutely, I'm with you. That's right. That with out of the fire into the frying pan, or
Right.
whatever that express is, something like that on steroids
Yeah.
happening there. Yeah, no, that's right.
That's good. Well, so one thing that I still wrestle with, that I bet the audience is probably in the dark on too is what does it mean that all Turing machines are reversible? I know there's like a huge proof and such, but can you help us understand? Because I just go, hey, just take my word on it that this is a thing. You can look it up if you want, but I don't really know how to explain it.
Right. Well, a lot of um, theorems that we're not talking about a world-beating theorem now. I mean, if you've got undergraduate level, if you've got they're diminishing, they're evaporating. If you got a good course in theory of computation, they'll cover it.
Mhm.
If you take such a class or read such material, if you're an autodidact, I know you are, so people in your audience might be, they can get it in
Definitely.
the relevant textbooks. And the first point to be made about that is they'll have to swallow. I mean, they could write the authors, they could, if they're in class, they could protest to the professor. Generally, they're going to have to swallow what are called simulation proofs. Um, so if we can show that some interesting new process can be simulated by a standard Turing machine with some expansion, and if we could show, including ourselves, that we can just using, goes back to Turing, just using, say, paper and pencil and eraser, that we can simulate, sometimes called hand simulate a process, then we know we can do it, even in the absence of some fully formal chain of reasoning. Okay. So you only need a simulation proof to see what this amounts to in the case of a Turing machine. When a Turing machine, there are many variations, but Turing machine's got a tape.
Mhm.
Let's go with this version. You can think about it as railroad track. Okay. A car on the railroad track is going to do our work for us. It's going to go up and down the track. But the track is neatly divided into squares. So every time there's the cross piece, the railroad tie, okay, they're uniform. Okay. Every time that happens, beneath the box car, there's something to write on, a whiteboard. And let's put, this is variations like this have been done by many people. You know, let's put a simpleton, or better, let's put a bird, or maybe a monkey that knows how to look down, see what's written, and then possibly erase it and write a new symbol. And we can give simple instructions for how to proceed with these maneuvers and nothing more. The procedure, the instructions is the program, and then we're talking about the physical architecture of the Turing machine corresponding to the box car with the monkey.
And the
Okay.
symbols are just 0 and 1, right?
Yeah, we can get away with a binary alphabet, although
Okay.
it's nasty. So we really should have
Yeah.
a
Okay.
space or a marker. So
Mhm.
I always, when I taught this all the time, I'd say, let's go with a ternary alphabet. We'll have a space. So we got 0, 1, a space. And so yes, every whiteboard underneath the boxcar is going to have either, you know, the blank marker, or a 0 or a 1.
Okay.
All right. So you have this thing do something start to finish. And now you want to say, well, by golly, is that reversible? Well, yeah. I mean, get someone from the rail yard off to the side to get a camera. And don't be too concerned about the movement from one square to the next because this is discrete.
Mhm.
We don't really, I mean, theoretically, there's a real number. We're talking analysis. That motion does involve going through, in some sense, an infinite number of places. We don't care about that in digital computation. So the camera is going to be, you're going to push, make it an iPhone or what have you. You're going to push that and take a picture every time the boxcar with the monkey gets to a new place and what's there under it. And then when the work is finished at that spot, another snapshot, wait, moves, snaps, snap, snap. So what you're going to have is what many of uh, your listeners and viewers will have. would be a really nasty uh, record for me in the iCloud of,
Mhm,
oh, this is like ridiculous. I've got 1,000 snapshots. Okay, so how do you reverse it? Well, you just go to the beginning, you go to the last one, and you say, hey, I'm going to run an algorithm now.
mhm,
I've got this as a blueprint. I'm getting myself the boxcar and the monkey, and I'm going to make sure it starts at the end and just goes boom, 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 boom. And I'm going to follow an algorithm to do that, any number of algorithms. That's all. That's reversibility. It's sort of like an armchair simulation proof. But these simulation proofs are very, very, very powerful. By the way, they allow us to know that if you have 1,000 tracks
mhm,
and 1,000 boxcars and 1,000 monkeys, there is no gain in power ultimately.
mm,
Speed wise, sure, but fundamental ability. And how do we know that? Well, we run a simulation proof. We see how we can reduce the 1,000 case to the one. And a lot of it is very intuitive to get through, to get that textbook written. And get this work done and teach the student. You're not coming up with a detailed formal proof of this.
mm,
So that's what reversibility is. State, 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 state through time. That's what a computation is. One to n states of the appropriate sort in the Turing machine or any such machine. Is there an algorithm that can reverse it? You're darn tootin' there is, and that implies reversibility, and that's what we have.
mm,
Okay, but
mm,
I'd like to see someone do that. Earlier in our conversation, I mentioned seeking first tracks on a mountain, strap your skis on. Um, how do I, give me the reverse P consciousness experience over an interval of time from the run that's at the top to the bottom.
mhm,
I mean, there's not even that's completely incoherent. My
yeah.
experience is going to be reversed by looking at the digitals. No, it's a unified, indivisible experience that we really have no idea how to mathematize, let alone put in digital form.
That's something I really appreciate about you is because you're so logic focused, you always focus on saying, "Can we make this precise? Can I symbolize this? Because I need to do the math. I need to do the logic on it." And I think that's just a really that's I've been trying to do that myself when I think about arguments and um, thinking of whether or not they're intuitive. I'm like, can we make this precise? And if we can't, maybe that's not as intuitive as we thought it was. Though, I know sometimes intuition can get us past or around or get to a point without. It's just a really helpful point in saying like, make that experience precise. And if you try to make your phenomenal conscious experience precise and like mathematize it, you might start seeing that this is futile, right? This is like not that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Yeah. Well,
But
so
I need that to be the result.
yeah. There as we're closing up here. So I'm glad that's how I've been describing it. So I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
you say that. But the train tracks and monkey is way more intuitive. So I'm gonna start using that. That's really good. Cause I the other day I was trying to explain to my wife and I was like, all right, there's a tape and we're gonna go through and she's like, I don't care about this. So but I think she'll care about the train. Um so
Well,
so
she
look
cares. She when she's on a train, she'll care about whether the train operates roughly on time, like doesn't in the US half the time versus Japan where it's like clouds. I like the Japanese system,
Mm.
so she'll care about that at some point, I know.
Yeah, that's right. We just gotta get a monkey on the train now. So yeah, you brought in the phenomenal consciousness. You're saying like, okay, so Turing machines are reversible. If all standard computation is reversible or is captured by or explained by a Turing machine, then they ought to be reversible as well. But it's cognition. There's a type of cognition called phenomenally conscious cognition, which looks like it doesn't even fit in that category. So not all cognition is computation. And you give this example of a sunset, and I thought it makes sense to me, but I'm wondering if someone would think of like four dimensionalism or occasionalism and say like, well, from if we're outside of time and space, you can imagine these time slices and then just reverse those back, and you see, well, now he's not experiencing the sunset anymore. I thought about like drinking coffee. I love coffee. So when I drink coffee, I'm experiencing this nice. There we go. Cheers. I have this experience of coffee, of tasting that flavor, but if you were to try to reverse that experience, like, what would that look like? How can you even describe the reverse of tasting coffee or tasting coffee for the first time? Or like, yeah, there's coffee molecules hitting my taste buds, but it's not something that's like this degreed thing. It's a phenomenal qualia experience. Like, is that to me, that's like the heart of the irreversible argument where you're saying, like, explain how you can reverse phenomenal consciousness or make it somehow, explicable.
No, you've got it. Um, there have only been 2 times when I've had to resort to the challenge on the spot upon either presenting the argument or just reminding people that it exists in
Mm,
public, well, semi-public and public discussion. And there have only been 2 times when I've had to go beyond, what you just said. To go beyond it, all I need to do is I could have paper handy. I could have whiteboard nearby, which in the last time in Washington D.C., actually Arlington, Virginia, um, it's like, oh, Selmer, no, I can't accept that. And then subsequently, I can't accept what Parker said. It can be done. This conscious, P conscious, this phenomenally conscious experience of coffee over 30 seconds, the ski thing over 5 minutes, it can be reversed. Um, when we've exhausted, how do you do that? Please describe to me these discrete states that are now going to go in reverse. I want to see it. Um, the final resort is you're really insisting on that. Here's the whiteboard. Here's the marker. Okay. So why don't you go show me how you can do what Turing could do at the drop of a hat, or Gödel, or von Neumann, or Schur, or any of these amazing pioneers who brought us digital computation with
mm,
thorough understanding and explain it. Why don't you just show me, okay, just even in broad shape, just show me how that's going to work on the whiteboard. You start from the last point. You show me the kind of thing it'll look like, and of course, good luck.
mhm,
Um, It's not possible. And no one's ever said, "Okay, I can do it," of course, so they can't do it.
yeah. Which is it's this is so good, because all you need to do is point out this P-conscious phenomenal experience and say, "Look, it's not reversible." If it's not reversible, then not all cognition is computation. We know we have conscious cognition. We're having it right now. And so you just work it all the way back, and it looks like cognition is not at least standard computation. And if it's
Right.
something non-standard, then we're back into, like, arguments for God, which is kind of fun too.
Yeah, we could link the 2 perhaps. Clearly, over a longer stretch of time in my own work it is, but
Yeah,
it
that's great.
really should stand on its own as a challenge to the slogan, which you rightly point out is still very much widely affirmed. By the way, people seem to never, so the level of reading and scholar, people tend to forget, or maybe they never knew that, Hillary Putnam was really the first person to the great philosopher and logician Hilary Putnam, who didn't die all that long ago. He was a believer in this standard slogan thing. Then long story super short, said, "Holy smokes, what was I thinking? What was I smoking? This is nutty. This
Mhm.
ain't true." And um, you know, I guess people don't want to, just, I guess Dennett never really came, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know what happened was going on in his cognition, but he should have just looked at what Putnam said and said, "Oh yeah, I got to look for something different." Stuck to
Yeah.
this view all the way along.
Well, so I love Putnam. People always ask, like, if there's someone who's no longer living that you'd love to have on the podcast. It's Hillary Putnam, always. So I'm with you on that. Sometimes my reductionist friends will do the same thing with Frank Jackson now, and they'll be like, "Why are you still talking about
Uh,
Mary's Room? Look at Frank like abandoned it." I'm like, "Well, he old Frank was better." His so I understand why I understand that people wanna push him on that as well. Doctor Bringsjord, I kept you a little bit longer. Is
yeah,
there
yeah.
one last thing that I think is a really good point? You mentioned in I think it's in the, Irreversibility paper, Cognition is not computation. There's a distinction between machine state functionalism and computationalism. Computationalism is a program in process. We are, a computation, we're a strange loop or whatever the AI folks say. Um, it's a computer program that's in process, whereas machine state functionalism, our mental states are machine states identified they're identified with the machine
One
state, and that's what consciousness
one
is.
second, one
Yeah,
second.
please.
I gotta put you on mute for is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry to get you right during that
Yeah.
train.
No problem, no problem. So there's this maybe I'm, overplaying it, but to me, it seems like you're making this distinction between computationalism and machine functionalism. Is that right?
Um, I yeah, y this is the start of a very large discussion, actually,
Okay.
about contemporary AI and consciousness and what looks to be possible or not in light of things like large language models, because recent work to just look at all the literature on this question. They don't, but recent work to look at um, the prospects of an AI in the near future being conscious, uh, specifically phenomenally conscious, uh, has this one paper in particular, a large one, has said, well, we assume functionalism.
Mhm,
So we assume a functionalist view of the mind and the brain, and there really is no distinction for them.
mhm,
They do not say what that amounts to,
mhm,
okay? And that's really unfortunate because functionalism as a general concept, as you know well, probably better than me in philosophy of mind, does not really have to be of of the Turing machine state variety. In
right.
fact, I think you mentioned long ago, you mentioned Chisholm, brings back memories of my time at Brown University when supervenience in philosophy of mind was sort of just hitting
Mhm,
a transom. And people were saying, yeah, I mean, it's functionalism is basically right, but you got to deal with this supervenience thing because you see, things are much more complex. We can't get into that. So
mm,
all of that stuff is unfortunately for us, we're out of time. It would need to be unpacked because there is a difference.
yeah,
After all, if you're just a naive functionalist, you might not even know what the heck you're talking about because you might just say, "Oh, I mean, like there's stuff that goes through time, and that stuff interacting gives rise to mentality." Okay,
yeah,
but this slogan is connected with something that's very, very meaningful from a scientific and engineering point of view and is still firmly intact, great traction and still being pursued where the states are states of a computing machine.
yeah,
And the transitions are transitions that are computable. They're following some program, some maybe some function, with a million things. So you put it's a big topic. Sorry.
yeah. Well, I'm so glad even just to find that distinction because, like, in philosophy of mind, they usually can join the 2, and it was confusing for me, so I'm gonna track that down more. That's funny about supervenience. Supervenience gave rise to emergence, and then emergence gave rise to grounding, and you have functionalism at each level. That's all of our time here, folks.
All right.
Dr. Bringsjord, thanks so much for coming back on. I appreciate your work, and I love to coax you in to coming back on again.
Sounds good. It's always enjoyable.
Awesome. All right, folks, that's gonna do it.
More than
This has
enjoyable.
been
Thank you so
Parker's
much.
Pensées. Yeah, thank you. As always, all glory to God.